It was just past 6 p.m., and the streets of downtown Charleston buzzed with the usual weekend rush. Expensive perfume mixed with the aroma of artisan bread from the shops, laughter poured out from open patios, and violins played softly in nearby restaurants offering candlelight dining. People were dressed for Friday evening. Scarves draped loosely, leather jackets unzipped, and polished shoes clicking across the pavement. The world seemed to move with confidence, with purpose, with comfort, but not for Autumn. 10-year-old Autumn James stood at the edge of the sidewalk, just outside the glittering glass door of Elysian, an upscale restaurant known for its live piano acts and French cuisine. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big, swallowing her petite frame, the cuffs frayed and stained with dirt from weeks of being worn every day. Her jeans were scuffed at the knees, and on her feet she wore old sneakers that had long said goodbye to their soles. Clutched in her right hand was a wrinkled piece of paper, a faded copy of Clair de Lune by Debussy, that her grandfather had once taught her to play. Though slightly torn along the edge, she kept it close to her, folded neatly in the inside pocket of her jacket, like a piece of her past that she refused to let go of. Autumn hadn't eaten a full meal in nearly 2 days. Her mother, once a full-time home care nurse, had lost her job after the clinic she worked for shut down due to budget cuts. With no college education, no savings, and no family left to turn to, things spiraled downward fast. At first, they sold the TV to make rent, then the sofa, then even Autumn's keyboard, the last gift her grandfather had given her before he passed. Now they were living in a musty one-room motel, the kind where the sheets smelled faintly of mold and the locks didn't always work. Her mother had taken a part-time job cleaning offices at night, but the money wasn't enough, and every evening they returned to the same tired feeling, hunger, both literal and emotional. That evening, when the cramps in her stomach became too hard to ignore, Autumn did what her mother told her never to do. She decided to ask, not for change, not for sympathy, but for a chance to play. She had seen the piano inside Elysian on many nights as they walked past it on the way back to motel. It was white alabaster. She'd heard it called once, with gleaming keys and a little golden lamp on top. Sometimes she'd press her hand against the cold window just to listen closely to the music inside. It stirred something in her, a feeling her belly didn't understand but her soul recognized. This time, though, she pushed open the glass door. Inside was warm and fragrant. The sound of carefully played jazz wrapped the room in elegance as people sipped wine and dined under soft lights. Waiters floated between tables like whispers, carrying plates of duck confit and roasted fig tartines. Autumn inched closer to the host stand, where a tall white man in a crisp black uniform stood checking reservations on a tablet. His name tag read Gerald. She looked up at him, pausing as if gathering courage like coins in a nearly empty jar. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice soft, careful not to interrupt too loudly. "I know I'm not dressed nice, but can I maybe play your piano just for a few minutes? I'm really hungry. Maybe they'll help." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The man looked up from his device and blinked, slowly, his eyes running over every detail of her frame. The hoodie, the shoes, the tangled coils of hair hiding beneath her knit cap, her skin the color of dark honey. He let out something between a snort and a chuckle, stepping slightly back as if her breath might soil the air around him. "This isn't the street corner, sweetheart," he said with a sideways smile. "We have hired professionals here." He turned back to his tablet, clearly dismissing her. A woman standing nearby, draped in faux fur, looked over her shoulder and chuckled, shaking her head in pity, or was it annoyance? Another man at the door leaned in to whisper, "Gotta admire the hustle, though. These kids think they can sing or play something, and people will toss money their way. Everybody got a sob story these days." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but was sharp, like shattered glass crunching underfoot. Autumn's heart shrank inside her chest. Her fingers hung at her sides like forgotten threads. She nodded slowly, murmured, "Okay," and turned back toward the door, dignity trailing behind her like a tattered scarf. Outside, the night had gotten colder. The sky, now tinged with violet, looked down at her like it, too, had seen what happened, silently, mournfully. She swallowed hard, willing herself not to cry. Her chest burned with the ache of rejection, not just of her request, but of her. They hadn't just dismissed her piano. They had dismissed her personhood. Her hunger didn't matter. Her talent didn't matter. Not in her clothes. Not in her skin. But just as she reached the sidewalk, a voice called gently over the din of the street. "Sweetheart, wait a moment." She turned. A woman was stepping down from the restaurant's patio, holding her handbag and a long wool shawl. Her hair was silver, her eyes kind and vivid behind gold-framed glasses. She looked directly at Autumn, not through her, like so many others did. "I saw what happened," the woman said. "What's your name?" Autumn hesitated, unsure, but there was something about her, something warm that reminded her of her grandmother's smile, soft and brave. "My name's Autumn," she replied, barely above a whisper. "Well, Autumn," the woman said, walking closer. "Would you still like to play that piano?" Autumn's lips parted, unsure if it was a trick, unsure if she could believe kindness after tasting shame. She nodded slowly. The woman smiled, then glanced back toward the restaurant doors. "Stay right here. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't move." And with that, she was gone. Autumn stood completely still. Around her, the world kept moving. Couples still laughed, taxis honked, waiters passed by with tiramisu and espresso shots. But for the first time that evening, she felt seen. Autumn stood on the sidewalk, like a statue carved out of unanswered prayers. The cold seeped through her too-light hoodie again, but she didn't dare move even a muscle. The silver-haired woman had said she'd be back, and Autumn believed her, not because people usually kept their promises, but because something in that woman's eyes didn't look like all the others. It didn't carry judgment. It didn't drift off. It looked, and it saw. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Autumn clenched her fingers together under her sleeves, trying to keep them warm. A breeze picked up, rustling leaves around her shoes and brushing her cheeks with the breath of October. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, still waiting, still unsure. Just as doubt began to drip into her thoughts like cold rain, the restaurant's heavy golden doors pushed open once again. The woman returned, now walking with quiet fire in her footsteps, a tremble of determination in her aging hands. She didn't come alone. Behind her followed the same restaurant manager, Gerald, the maitre d' who had dismissed Autumn with a smirk just moments earlier. His face no longer bore the same smug confidence. Instead, it was taut, stiff with reluctance, as if he'd been shoved into a conversation he didn't want to have and lost it. Autumn's eyes flicked toward the woman, searching for an answer without asking. The woman offered a soft smile. "I made a few calls," she said lightly. "A few promises. You're going to play that piano." Autumn felt her heart stop for a second, then lurch forward, wild and unsure. She blinked in disbelief. He had said no. He had laughed at her. Everyone in that lobby had thought she was a joke. And now she was being invited in? Gerald exhaled sharply through his nose and gestured with a practiced hand. "Come in. Just don't disrupt the diners too much." His words clanged with coldness, but Autumn hardly noticed. The woman beside her was already leading the way, one wing of her shawl trailing in the wind like a proud flag. As they entered the restaurant, it felt like a different world entirely. People with silk scarves and diamond earrings glanced toward the door, likely expecting a staff member or another diner, not a little black girl in a hoodie. Conversations dropped off mid-sentence. Spoons paused midair. Autumn could feel the weight of 100 side glances squeezing the back of her neck. The hush wasn't loud, but it was thick, suffocating. She walked slowly, the path to the baby grand piano, that gleaming white beacon that had lived in her dreams for months, felt longer than any hallway she'd ever taken in her life. Each footstep echoed in her chest. Beside the piano, the current live pianist, a young man with dark hair and delicate fingers, was packing up. Autumn dared a small smile at him, unsure if he'd be offended. He offered her a confused look, then a tilted head of curiosity, and then he stood, stepped back, and led her in front of the keys. The piano was glowing under a soft crystal light, the kind of light that made glassware sparkle and eyes look forgiving. Her mother wasn't here. Granddaddy wasn't here, but she was. She was here. And for the first time, someone had opened the door instead of bolting it shut behind her. She slid onto the bench. Her legs barely reached the pedals, but that never stopped her before. She reached up slowly, gently, fingertips hovering above the ivory keys, trembling with hunger and heartbeats. And in that moment, the restaurant breathed as one. No one could imagine what would come next. The air stilled. Autumn closed her eyes and let her fingers find home. She did not start with anything flashy. No thunderous opening. No chords meant to impress. She began soft, simple, a melody familiar but reimagined. A lullaby her mother used to hum when she worked night shifts and didn't wake her, something she later learned came from Chopin. Within seconds, the gentle music began to flow, then blossom, then take flight across the hall like sunlight spilling over a dark room. People who looked away before were now turned in their chairs. Conversation stopped altogether. There wasn't a clink of a glass or the scrape of a knife, only the haunting beauty of a lonely girl filling silence with tenderness and truth. Autumn didn't play notes. She told stories with those keys. She blended classical phrasing with soul, a touch of blues in places that were meant to be strict, a hint of gospel in sections that should have been uptight. It was messy. It was wrong. It was glorious. Because it wasn't just music. It was her, all of her hunger, her mother's tears, her grandfather's soft voice guiding her wrists when she was barely tall enough to reach octaves. The sound that poured from the piano wasn't practiced. It was lived. Every note carried years that felt heavy in a girl so small. As she finished, it sounded like a piece of her very soul, ending on a suspended chord that hung breathless for what felt like forever. The restaurant remained frozen. No claps, no movement, just silence, stunned, still silence. That kind of silence that only exists when the soul recognizes truth and can't find words to respond. And then, slowly, like a sunrise cracking through the sky, the first pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then a whole table rose to their feet. Then another. And before she knew it, the room shook. Not with laughter this time, but with hands clapping, chairs moving, napkins falling, applause rising like a wave. Autumn stared wide-eyed. She didn't understand what was happening. She hadn't planned to amaze them. She only wanted a warm meal, a moment to be heard, a chance to belong. But somehow, she had reminded a crowd of strangers what beauty looked like when it came dressed as struggle. The same woman who had helped her, now standing at the back, a tear rolling down her cheek, nodded slowly, as if to say, I knew. They didn't, but now they do. Gerald, stiff at the host stand once again, watched it all unfold like a man cornered by his own dismissal of humanity. His cheeks were flushed with quiet embarrassment. For once, he had no script, no policy to defend his coldness. Just truth, loud and raw, drowning out his years of prejudice. As Autumn stepped down from the bench, unsure whether bow or hide, something extraordinary happened. A woman in a velvet dress walked over and slipped a $50 bill into her hand. Another man offered his untouched steak dinner, packing it carefully to go. A young couple whispered something to a waiter, whose seconds later appeared with a plate of food and a cup of hot cocoa, extra marshmallows on top. Autumn looked down at the gifts, then up at the faces now beaming with admiration, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt warmth, not from the food or the lights, but from something deeper. Kindness. A kindness she hadn't begged for. A kindness that shouldn't have taken performance to earn. Yet here it was, blooming like hope in a room where just minutes ago she had been invisible. Autumn didn't know how to respond to applause. She had never been applauded before. Not like this. Her performances used to be in quiet corners of her grandfather's church, where a few heads would nod gently to the sound of her tiny hands pressing the keys while choir members hummed softly along. But this wave of emotion, pulsing through a room that had once laughed at her presence, felt like some strange, unexpected dream. She stood beside the piano, frozen. People rose from their seats, their eyes glistening, hearts cracked open by the storytelling her music had done. Some clapped softly, hands close to their chests, others more loudly, bending forward like they wanted to reach her, to hold her, to say sorry without words. Autumn didn't bow, not out of arrogance. She simply didn't know she should. Her cheeks flushed red with both embarrassment and thankfulness. She gave a small, nervous smile and slowly backed away from the piano, lowering her eyes like maybe, if she looked down long enough, she'd disappear. But she didn't. People weren't letting her disappear this time. One woman with red lipstick and a coat that probably cost more than a month's rent rushed forward, tears threatening her mascara. She pressed a rich leather wallet into Autumn's hand. "Take this," she whispered. "You reminded me of something I forgot I carried." Another gentleman, tall and quiet, handed her a gold fountain pen with initials engraved on the side. "It was my late father's," he said softly. "He would have adored you." Autumn stared at the items in her hands, as though holding puzzle pieces from lives she didn't belong to. But in that moment, somehow, she did belong. Across the room, near the back wall draped in velvet curtains, Lena stood, the silver-haired lady who had given Autumn her voice back. She hadn't said a word through the entire performance. No applause, no head turns. She simply watched, tears silently tracing the hollows of her cheeks like rain down old windows, familiar but necessary. Everyone noticed Autumn's music, but only Lena noticed how much it had cost her to play it. As Autumn slowly approached her, the applause fading into murmurs, Lena reached out and gently squeezed the girl's hand. There was no speech, no praise, only something deeper, recognition, respect. The unspoken understanding between two generations who, in their own way, had both been silenced. "You did something brave tonight," Lena said quietly. "You didn't just play music, you made them feel their silence. And that, my dear, is a gift very few have." Autumn looked up at her, with wide eyes that still held trembling hope. "It's the only thing I've ever been good at," she whispered. "Granddaddy said when your heart's heavy, play like it's speaking. And that way, even if no one listens to you, they'll listen to it." Lena smiled, not the kind of polite smile used in crowded rooms, but one that tugged deep at the corners, built from years of pain, pride, and finally peace. He was right. Behind them, the restaurant staff, unsure what to do, had become busy shadows, clearing plates, refilling glasses, pretending not to be affected when their eyes, something had shifted too. Even Gerald, the maitre d' who had first turned her away with icy indifference, couldn't pretend he hadn't felt it. He stood quietly behind the host stand, his lips pursed in, his posture awkward. For all his years of training in hospitality, he had never seen a crowd moved by anything other than the chef's specials or a celebrity sighting. And now, it was a hungry black girl in a hoodie. The humiliation didn't come from being wrong, but from how quickly the world reminded him what he failed to see. Humanity. He approached Lena and Autumn hesitantly, clearing his throat. That was impressive," he said, eyes flicking from the girl to the floor. "Very talented. We should have, treated you better when you came in." Autumn lowered her gaze again, unsure whether to speak. Lena stepped forward, her voice calm, yet firm, not confrontational, but maternal. "She didn't ask much," she said. "Just to play, just to be seen. And if kindness is only offered after applause, then it isn't kindness at all, is it?" Gerald's face flushed a shade of something between guilt and recognition. He nodded softly. "You're right," he admitted, and that, alone, felt heavier than any scolding. With the commotion quietly dying down, some tables returned to their meals, though nothing would taste the same now. For what Autumn had played into the room wasn't music. It was memory, struggle, resilience, and above all, presence. The kind that says, "I exist whether you approve or not." Someone had captured the entire performance on their phone. A young woman with dreadlocks and silver hoops had started uploading it before Autumn even finished her final note, her caption already typed. They laughed when she asked to play, and then this happened. The video would travel farther than even Autumn could imagine, but at that exact moment, she didn't know. She only knew warmth, because something unexpected happened next. A waiter returned with a tray not just carrying food, but a bowl of warm mac and cheese, a toasted sandwich, and a hot chocolate with whipped cream and cinnamon on top. "For you," he said shyly, placing it on a nearby table. On the house. Autumn's eyes lit up, and she looked to Lena for permission, still unsure if any of this was real. Lena nodded, and there, in a world that had once told her no for simply standing at the door, Autumn finally sat down, not as someone asking, but as someone invited. As she sipped the cocoa, she closed her eyes and let a gentle sigh slip from her lips. Her hunger wasn't entirely gone, but for the first time in weeks, something inside her felt full. What filled her wasn't just the food or the applause, it was dignity. It was being seen. It was the music she had carried like a secret, finally being heard. That night, before she and Lena left, a young girl approached Autumn near the patio, around her age, with light freckles and strawberry blonde hair tied in braids. She looked down, nervously shifting her weight. "My mom said I should tell you. You made me cry a little," she admitted. "But, in a good way. I didn't know girls like me and girls like you could like the same songs. Can I learn to play like that one day, too?" Autumn looked at her, really looked, and smiled. It was her first real smile in days. "Yeah," she said softly. "You can." And for the first time that evening, kindness felt shared, not just received. By the time the stars softly draped themselves in the Carolina sky, flickering like distant memories, the video was no longer just a video. It had leapt across timelines and platforms, slipped silently into phones, laptops, and living room TVs. Shared not just in likes or hearts, but in tears, replays, and conversations. It was the kind of moment people pause their busy lives to watch again, to show someone, to feel something they hadn't allowed themselves to feel lately. A 10-year-old black girl in a faded hoodie had sat down at a piano in a world not made for her, and played every broken piece of her soul into a room of privilege. And the world was listening now. It started small. A local blogger wrote an article the next morning. They laughed at her until she made them cry, the girl who played her hunger into hope. Then came the emails. Then the phone calls. By noon the following day, Lena's phone was vibrating constantly with notifications from numbers she didn't recognize. Music schools calling. News channels. Even a morning talk show producer from New York. Autumn, still in the same oversized hoodie, sat across from Lena at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around another cup of cocoa Joan had brought home just for her, unsure if this was all still a dream. Moments like these weren't meant to happen in Autumn's world. There had been no room for cameras and microphones during eviction notices, or when she waited outside the dollar store hoping someone would offer a snack. Now, suddenly, the world wanted to see her, not just as a poor girl or a sad story, but as a voice, a light. Lena turned her phone toward her gently. On the screen was a fundraising page started by a stranger who'd been in the restaurant that night. The title read, "Help Autumn's Music Find a Home." Within 24 hours, it had raised over $87,000. Autumn looked at the number, blinking silently. She couldn't understand how digits could feel like peace. I've never had that much of anything before," she said quietly. Lena leaned forward, resting her hand atop Autumn's. "It's because they heard you, sweetheart. Not just your music. You broke something open in them. Maybe even in me." Autumn tilted her head slightly, confused. "But I didn't mean to break anything." Lena smiled softly. "Some things need to break. Walls. Assumptions. Hearts that we've forgotten how to feel. You reminded them. You reminded all of us." Just then the doorbell rang. It was Autumn's mother, wrapped in her work uniform, sweat still clinging to her collar, and fatigue hanging on her like a heavy coat. When her eyes met Autumn's, she tensed, unsure why her baby was here, unsure if something had happened. But when Lena told her about the performance, the response, the video, the money, the messages, her hands rose to her face, trembling. "I always told her she had music in her bones," her mother whispered through streaming tears. "Even when we were starving, even when I was ready to give up, she'd be tapping on the motel wall like it was a symphony." She pulled Autumn into her arms and held her there, not because the world had finally seen her daughter, but because she had never needed the world's permission to know her child's worth. But now, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, the world was finally catching up. That weekend, Autumn was invited to appear on a local TV show. Lena curled her hair gently that morning, combing it with oils her own mother used to apply when she was a girl in Georgia during the days where sundown towns ruled the South. "I want her to look proud," Lena said, dabbing a hint of lip balm on Autumn's lips. "But I also want to look just like herself. No glitter, no costumes. Just Autumn, the way the world met her that night." Autumn's blazer had been donated by a music teacher who saw the video and drove for hours just to hand it to her. It was blue, soft, and too big, but it made her shoulders look brave. On the show, the host leaned in with the kind of almost grown-ups reserved for heroes or miracle workers. "Autumn," he said, his voice careful but amazed, "you didn't just play music, you moved people. What do you want now? What's your dream?" Autumn looked into the camera with her big, brown eyes, the same eyes they had looked past days before, and for a long second, she didn't speak. Then with quiet grace, she said, "I just want to keep playing. I just want to be allowed to play, even if I don't look like someone who belongs near a piano." You could feel the air in the studio shift. Even behind the cameras, a lighting technician wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. It wasn't just what she said, it was who she was, and why she had to be the one to say it. Soon major institutions began reaching out. Letters arrived from Juilliard, from historically black colleges, from international children's music foundations offering scholarships and mentorships. But none of that was what changed Autumn the most. What changed her, what settled in her chest like the warmest kind of sunrise, was a small white envelope that came in the mail a few days later. Inside was a card. No name, no return address. Only a handwritten message in thoughtful, shaky script. "I was one of the ones who laughed when you asked to play. I am a white woman. I judged you before I knew you. You changed me. Thank you for forgiving us, even when we didn't ask." Autumn held the note close to her heart that night, not for the apology, but for the quiet proof that change is real, even if it's slow, even if it's fragile. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted to be heard. And now she was, not because she demanded attention, not because she sought pity, but because she spoke the universal language of pain and hope at the same time, with only 88 keys and a pair of tiny hands. Outside Lena's home that night, as the day died and the stars returned quietly to witness this new chapter, Autumn stood by the window looking up. She traced a finger against the glass, drawing a line of music only she could hear. And in the silence, she whispered, "I think Granddaddy would have said this is just a prelude." Weeks had passed since that night, the night a little girl changed the room by playing the truth from her fingertips. But what began as a moment hadn't faded like most viral stories do, where tomorrow's distraction washes away yesterday's lesson. No, Autumn's heartbeat was still echoing in places it had no intention of disappearing from. She was no longer the invisible girl on the sidewalk. She was the voice who had found a piano and turned it into a mirror. Autumn now lived in a small but warm apartment with her mother. The broken heater was replaced, and for the first time in too long, their fridge was full. The smell of cinnamon from stovetop oatmeal danced in the air most mornings, and a quiet hum of safety moved through the walls. No sirens outside, no mold on the sheets, no hunger gnawing at her after midnight. But fame never interested her. It was kindness that made her feel full. Even in all the offers, stages, interviews, Autumn remained the same. She still asked, "May I play?" before touching any piano. She still helped her mother fold laundry and walk the neighbor's dog just so she could buy her teacher a small bouquet of daisies. That's who she was before. That's who she remained. And now, something beautiful was unfolding, not because she became a trending topic, but because she became a teacher without even knowing it. Across the country, schools use her story in classrooms, not just as a tale of talent, but of humility, injustice, perseverance, and unmatched grace. In one city, a music academy added her name to a scholarship to uplift gifted black children from underfunded areas. In another, a piano manufacturer pledged to donate instruments to 10 public schools in her honor. People didn't just share her video anymore. They told her story, lesson by lesson, word by word. One day, Autumn received an invitation, not from the media, not from a talk show, but from the one stage she dreamed of since she was old enough to pronounce Beethoven. The invitation came from the director of Lincoln Center in New York City, a handwritten letter with elegant strokes that read, "Dear Autumn James, the world heard your music, and it changed us. We would be honored for you to close out our Young Piano Virtuoso Gala next month. No glitter, no fanfare needed. We only ask you to bring your truth like you always have." Autumn never cried in front of many, but as she read that letter in her mother's arms, her tears traced a silent lullaby across her cheeks, one that said, "Granddaddy, I made it." But not just she had made it. Her mother had. Lena had. Everyone who ever sat quietly in a room where people didn't believe in them had made it too. The night of the concert arrived, and the hall shimmered with elegance. Marble flooring, golden chandeliers, rows and rows of seats filled with faces not always used to seeing young black girls on that stage, unless they were behind the scenes cleaning it. But this night was different. Autumn wore a simple navy blue dress, the same color as the blazer from her first TV appearance. Her hair was in its natural glory, styled in a soft crown twist by a community stylist who donated her time for the little queen who changed the world. Backstage, she held her breath, not from fear, from reverence. There was something holy about being asked to speak again, not with words, but with music, and she knew now how powerful that speech could be. Before stepping onto the gleaming stage, she reached into her pocket. There, folded carefully, was a letter from the woman who admitted to laughing that night back at the restaurant. The anonymous apology. Autumn kept it with her now, not to remind her of the pain, but to never forget how much change could hide inside a human heart if given a chance to bloom. She walked slowly to the piano, the weight of silence following with her, not pressure, attention, respect, witnessing. She sat down, no script, no speech, and then she played. But this was not a song of sadness. Not this time. This was a song of return, of coming home to the version of herself that had once stared through restaurant glass dreaming big, afraid to ask. This was a song of forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. And it showed. Her playing wasn't flawless, but it was honest. No perfection, just presence. There, on one of the most prestigious stages in the world, a little black girl who once played piano for food offered up what might have been the most nourishing sound the audience had ever heard. When the last note vanished into the open rafters like a final prayer, the crowd rose to their feet before the quiet could fully settle. Every hand applauding had once judged others, spoken carelessly, or looked away from pain. But tonight, every hand clapped with something more sacred. Gratitude. Back in Charleston, in the quiet neighborhood where Autumn now lived, kids watched that performance sitting on porch steps, listening not to music, but to the miracle of one of their own being seen. Not a statistic, not a sob story, but a star that refused a burnout. A few days later, Autumn went back to the restaurant, not to relive the pain, not for food, but because she wanted to thank the piano. Not many believed her when she said instruments had souls. But Autumn knew better. She walked in with Lena beside her, wearing the same sneakers she had worn that very first night, now cleaned and tied tight. Gerald was there, so was the woman in fur who once laughed. They froze when they saw her. The silence didn't come from arrogance. It came from realization, the quiet crumbling of pride when confronted by grace. Autumn paused before the piano and touched its white frame, gently brushed her fingers over its keys. "This place gave me hunger," she said softly, not in anger but with clarity. "But it also gave me a voice." No one said anything. They didn't need to. She turned to the staff, the waiters who clapped too late that evening but clapped with the purest hand they could find, and smiled. "I hope you let the next girl play sooner." And with that, she left. No dramatic ending. No camera flash. Just Autumn, walking boldly into a world that once shut doors, now opening them before she asks. The little girl who once asked to play for food had, in truth, fed something far more meaningful, a world starving for understanding, kindness, and shared humanity. And in her quiet, gentle way, Autumn reminded us all that behind every asking hand is a story. And behind every story is a kind of music that, if we just listen closely enough, can change everything.